Hello Internet, this is Joe from the Inward Markings Garment Company, which is a small clothing brand that I launched on Sunday. This is a daily web show that I'll be doing to give people some background into the brand and hopefully to raise awareness of it. Chapter 1 is up and I recommend that people watch that in relation to today's video. Today's content will make more sense. The online store is now operational at inwardmarkings.com and you can follow the brand on Instagram at inwardmarkings. I'm not typically a front of camera person and so this is not easy for me. So thank you if you watch chapter 1 and there's a lot to discuss, so bear with me and thank you to anyone who gets through it all. But as I explained yesterday, the last kind of 22 or so months leading up to the formation of the brand has been an unusual and interesting experience that I did not expect, and it feels that it will be valuable to share that. And as I also mentioned in chapter 1, it's caused me to reevaluate my life up till now, as the connections have kind of become apparent. And so I'm not trying to bore you all with like details of my life because I think I'm so significant. It's just, it feels important to discuss those connections because it feels very much like it's been a destined process that I'm only really kind of understanding now, and where I am now is kind of where I have to be. And it's it's destiny, and I'm still processing it, as I mentioned yesterday. And thank you for anyone who's provided support or who watched yesterday's video. I will be discussing each of the 10 designs of the inaugural line in future videos, give the background story, hopefully clarify the symbolism and quotes that some of the designs are based on, if there is anyone who is not clear on that. There's 40 or 50 more designs that I need to get out there, and hopefully I'll be able to do that regardless of what happens with Inward Markings. Please check out inwardmarkings.com and follow us at Instagram. As I left off yesterday, adolescent drug experimentation and near-death experiences are relevant to this chapter. Before I talk about drugs though, I just need to establish that the stigma around drug use I think it's gotten better over the last couple of decades, but the judgment that people are subjected to because they come into contact with drugs that are illegal just doesn't make sense. I mean, this will be obvious to a lot of you, but the vast majority of people use drugs on a daily basis, and the distinction is legislative. So caffeine, alcohol, which are used on a daily basis by so many people, both of those things are drugs, believe it or not. And I encourage people to, if they are users of those drugs, to consider what life would be like if not only those drugs were illegal and the police attention that comes with that, but also if the prices of those drugs were greatly inflated because of that situation, and what impact that would have on your life, and to then consider that in terms of people who are using drugs that are currently illegal. I'm not going to go on a big rant about it, but I just feel it's important to establish that because it is, even for someone like me who feels confident about my perspective regarding drugs, it's difficult to talk about because that judgment, it does your head in. And this is the first time I've talked about it, like, to the world, basically via the internet. So yeah, it's I think for the benefit of not just what I'm doing here, but overall, we need to move beyond judgmental attitudes regarding drug use. It's a complicated area, and I haven't come across any other field or area of life where everyone feels like they're the fucking expert. Like in zoology or physics, so many people are more than willing just to accept or to say, look, I don't know anything about that, or I've got no experience, so yeah, whatever. But drugs come up, and everyone's waxing lyrical. As soon as the issue comes up, saying this, that, and the other, regardless of their experience, it seems. And it's certainly been the case with columnists and media people who put out harmful material on drugs without the expertise to back it up. It's curious. Let's just say that. And so yeah, so I'm not talking about it as part of this because I want to have a rant. It is just that my drug use has, as part of this ongoing understanding that I'm engaged in, it is, I've come to the conclusion that my experiences with drugs have been indispensable in terms of that destined process that I talked about. So for some reason, separate to the bullying stuff that I talked about yesterday, and prior to the strange concert ticket happening, I just found myself very interested in drugs and drug culture from a very early age. Like, I read the Bret Easton Ellis book Less Than Zero. I think I was around 10 or 11, and just loved that book. And my brother had a lot of Charles Bukowski books on his bookshelf, and I immediately gravitated towards those and really found those of interest. So Charles Bukowski writes a lot about alcohol, but I guess it's just this the culture of people who are outsiders, which was also a book that I read at an early age. S.E. Hinton's Outsiders and Rumblefish, great books. And this kind of altered experience, maybe even just the idea of, as well, people being somewhat self-destructive, and drugs being a part of that. For some reason, it just resonated with me. It's not something that I could articulate at the time, and it's not something that I can properly explain now. But it just resonated with me strongly. And so, as part of my interest in the Manchester rave scene that I mentioned yesterday, drug experimentation was part of that, and the friends who I was around, we were all able to somehow meet people who had access to drugs, and it was just something that, well, I'm not going to speak for anyone else, but for me, it was something that I felt I needed to do. It wasn't about, oh, look, that singer or whoever is doing it or sings about it or writes about it. It was just something that I had a deep feeling regarding. And so, smoking pot and taking acid were the initial drugs. And in terms of the gateway theory, I think that if there were the harder drugs available, I potentially could have experimented with those first. So it wasn't about like a graduation process from soft to hard drugs. It was just and I've come to consider it innate desire to alter my experience via substances, and and it was something that I felt from a very young age. And so what was particularly interesting about those early experimentation days is spending time with people who'd smoked pot for a much longer time, who were much older, who didn't fit the stereotype, and who were working jobs, intelligent, really good people, and influenced me greatly during that time. I was involved with political activism for some of that time, and so there were people as part of that scene, but also there were even other people, whether they were skaters or fellow skaters, should I say, or just people that I hung out with. We had a lot of fun experimenting with pot. There were great times, just having fun. A lot of food-based joy, a lot of out in the nature experiences that were great. And our lives weren't ruined. We didn't. There was no violence. There was no crime. It was based on our legitimate experiences after smoking pot. A lot of laughter, a lot of music, creativity, and so it was something that grew from there, which I hope comes across as understandable, given how much we love fun and sharing those experiences with friends, etc. And so I moved out of home during my final year of high school because it just became untenable based on stuff that was going on with family. And again, like at the time I was like, oh fuck, there were good parts to it, obviously, like independence, and but it's still stressful. But in hindsight, it led to experiences that have brought me to where I am now, and seem integral. So while living out of home during my final year of high school, which I did finish, and I think, despite, and I completed my high school certificate during that drug experimentation phase, and I got 2 awards in my final year for English and English literature, and also for a state award as well. So smoking pot did not destroy my intelligence, and I did well. I did well in my final year. I moved in with a woman who was, I was sort of 16, 17, she was around 24, 25, and an older woman, and there was an older guy there as well, but this older woman was someone I developed a friendship with, and just became fascinated by her life experiences. and drugs were a big part of that. So it connected with the stuff that I've talked about so far. And but it was also like another book that I read in my final year of high school is Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth. I think the issues relating to gender inequality and misogyny and sexism, femininity versus masculinity, or that whole kind of area has also been of interest to me from a young age. And what was significant about the friendship I had with the woman that I moved in with is that she spoke of a really terrible history of spousal abuse, including violent rape. And like with the final page of Iggy's House, I distinctly remember just a full body sickened feeling as she's describing what occurred to me, and it left me speechless. But it's that same feeling where you just where you if you don't physically double over, emotionally you become crippled. And that like Iggy's House transformed kind of the way that I saw the world from then on. And the woman whose name I won't mention just out of respect had a history of injecting amphetamine use, and that's something that may seem shocking to people watching this, but it became entirely understandable to me when I injected amphetamines for the first time, or she injected me with the amphetamines for the first time, and I was very much a willing participant as part of that drug experimentation process, because injecting drug use is what's powerful about it is that it has an immediate impact that is, well, for me it was unlike anything that I experienced in my life, and it makes sense that people become addicted, attached to it so heavily. And for me, the way I described it to her after the experience was, it was like a full body feeling of love. And she was quite taken by that, because she said no one had ever described it that way to her before. But for me, I think it was especially significant because the trauma from the bullying at such an early age, I think, can leave you feeling so raw. And I might not have acknowledged it at the time, but in addition to like that early interest that I had in drugs and drug culture, the actual experience with those drugs then like offset that rawness, which I'm kind of only understanding later rather than at the time. And so for this woman, I perceive it in the same way. So when particularly brutal trauma occurs, and in the absence of other supports or other alternatives, if something can completely turn that on its head in a way that you could never expect and can't quite comprehend, then why wouldn't you seek that out further? And I think especially with drugs, they are something like food that you that you put inside your physical self, and then it interacts with your, you know, your neurotransmitters, your physiology. So, you know, like with anything, those experiences that we feel deeply within us are the most significant. And so there's great power to that, obviously. And even with like external things like gambling or exercise, those things are affecting our internal chemistry. And so there's great power in those as well. But I think there's something particularly powerful about that which we put into our bodies. But, you know, it depends on the individual, I think. So you'll get some people who become far more heavily invested or addicted regarding gambling, and then other people who have a far less intensive experience with drugs or drug experimentation. And so I then travelled with that woman to a town further up the west coast of Western Australia called Carnarvon, and we worked on prawn and scallop trawlers on there for a few months as part of a plan to travel around the circumference of Australia via Darwin and then down to Sydney, where this woman is originally from. And a curious thing happened on the fishing trawler that I was working on. We didn't work on the same one. That was my first near-death experience. So there have been 3 in my life. This was the first one, and I don't think I properly processed it after it occurred, and it's only really something I'm thinking about now because of what's happened leading up to the launch of Inward Markings. And the nets of these trawlers drag behind the boat along the bottom of the ocean floor, and they just the boat travels and the net sweeps and things just get caught up in it, and when they get released, it's really important that you're on the right side of the rope, this big heavy rope that the net's attached to. And I can't remember why, but after everyone had gone inside, because what happens when the trawling occurs is that the crew go inside and just wait for the nets to come back up again. And so the rest of the crew, like 4 or 5 people, had gone inside, and for some reason I was still hanging out on the back deck of the trawler, and found myself on the wrong side of that rope. And so the nets got released, and these nets, they must weigh at least a ton. They're really heavy, and the machinery, as you can imagine, is really powerful. And so the rope pulled me. So I was then basically destined to go down with the nets and be on the ocean floor along with like sharks, sea snakes, etc. And I would have survived seconds. And the engine of the trawler is so loud that I was in that, even if I could scream loudly, I can't imagine anyone would have heard. And so I was literally about to go down with the nets, and I wasn't screaming because I was just in such shock, and I distinctly remember just this point of resignation where I was like, okay, this is how it's going to end. And just as my fingers, because I'd managed to catch on to the side of the what do you call that thing? Anyway, the side of the boat, just as my fingers were kind of prying loose and that point of resignation was being felt, one of the crew just emerged from inside and managed to pull me back up. And it happened at exactly the right time. And he just, I can't can't remember the conversation we had, but he didn't hear me scream or anything like that. He just had a sense that he needed to come out and check what was happening. And but he came out at exactly the right time and saving me from going under. Again, afterwards I just, considered it good luck, and really was so overwhelmed with the shock of it all that just was relieved and carried on, but didn't really give it too much thought after that for some reason. But again, based on the last 22 months, I've come to reassess that, and also the subsequent kind of near-death or near kind of equivalent to death experiences that I had. I think that's more than enough now. It's 25.52 minutes. That is ridiculous. Hopefully you're still tuned in, and chapter 3 tomorrow we'll move on to Sydney, and a significant LSD experience. So I hope you can tune in for that, and I hope that I'll be able to make these briefer over time. Thank you for tuning in. See ya.